We're going to have a presentation on financial literacy, specifically budget preparedness and banking for artists, presented to us by Debt-Free Danae out of New York. Debt-Free Danae is a dance artist and financial wellness educator. She partners with individual groups and institutions to design financial education curriculum and develop long-term financial wellness strategies. Danae believes that everyone deserves accessible financial education and counseling in a compassionate, culturally responsive setting. She is a certified credit counselor and serves on the associate board of the Council on Economic Education. She holds a BA from Stanford University and an MFA in dance from Florida State University. Danae is currently developing a movement financial literacy mobile app for kids called Cheer Coins. You can follow her on Instagram at DebtFreeDanae. Danae, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This session is funded in part by the National Endowments for the Arts. And before we get started, I'm just going to ask if everybody please mute their mic when they're not speaking so that we can cut back on feedback. And without further ado, Debt-Free Danae, thank you.
Hello, good evening. Welcome everyone. Thanks for being here to talk about your finances on a Thursday evening. As Patrick mentioned, I'm coming in from New York, specifically Brooklyn, and I'm excited. I was really excited to get his invitation to be here and to share my story and as much as I can around budgeting and banking, and we'll have time for questions after each section. So I'll talk banking first, some questions, budgeting questions, and then any questions that you have, and I'll do my best to answer all of them before we run out of time. So as far as what you would need for the workshop, I would say if you just have something that you can take notes with, that would be great. Don't worry, there won't be a lot of slides where you have to try to keep up, or where the slides, there's only 2 documents that we'll be using, and I'll be sharing the link when we get to that point. And I think that's all of the logistical things. So I'll start with just telling a bit about my story so that you have some context for the things that we're talking about and why it's important to me to share with you all about the topic. So I've been a professional dancer in New York City for 10 years. I officially crossed my 10-year mark, and it was very much the classic, I moved to New York City with 1 suitcase and just told my parents, I'm doing it. I'm out. And I, without probably very much of a financial plan, more so than anything, it was just yes, I'm going to be a star and I'm ready to go to New York. And it was financially very difficult when I got here. And I had student loans, and I remember I was auditioning for a dance company, and I was telling the dancer next to me, there were 500 dancers for this audition. It was an all-day situation. And I was like, you know what, if I don't get this gig, I'm gonna have to get a different day job because Sally Mae wants her money. That was my student loan lender. And she was like, okay. And I was like, well, I think I would be able to be more free as an artist if I didn't have this debt. And I just made it a resolution at that time to pay off all of my debt. And I set myself the goal of 3 years. So for the next 3 years, I really, really worked hard around learning about how to budget, how to use my money, where my money was going, and paid off all of my debt, credit card debt, student loan debt, and everything over the next 3 years. And I have been debt-free for 4 years now. So it has been a huge change in my artistic practice, just not having that weight. And more people started asking me questions. I had a party at the end called Danae's Debt-Free Fiesta, and it was for my birthday. And people were forgot it was my birthday. They were just oh my gosh, you don't have any debt. I need to talk to you about this situation. And I was like, yeah, but it's my birthday too. And they're like, yeah. But no, we need to talk about the debt situation. Can you tell me how to get myself together and all the togetherness? And I was like, well, I can tell you about my personal situation, but people had other issues like mortgages and things that I was like, I live in New York City. I do not have a mortgage. I will probably not have a mortgage anytime soon. So I started researching how to find out how to give financial advice, financial planning advice, and I ran into the Certified Financial Planner Board, and I applied for a scholarship with them, and they paid for my financial education. So I was doing that in the midst of dancing at the same time. And that was 3 years ago. So I've been practicing in this way for almost 4 years. And right now in New York City, I do financial coaching for a company called Trust Plus. And we focus on families that are in the low to middle income range, which for me can range. I have clients who may not be making any money because they're not the partner in a relationship that's the money earner. So anywhere from 20,000 ish all the way up to about 150,000 is probably the range of clients that I see, which is a pretty wide range. You cross some tax brackets in the midst of that. So yeah, that's kind of how I arrived to be sharing with you all tonight. I'll pause there. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so we're gonna jump right into banking. So this is the most important thing to remember about banking, and sort of is like the headline quote for this is, don't pay to use your money. And I'll say that again, do not pay to use your money. With clients that I see, that's probably the number one sort of just leak on their cash, is that they have a bank that charges monthly fees, or they might not be using a bank. They might be using prepaid cards. They might be using the card from their employer to get their paycheck. They might be using check cashing services or other services that charge you to either receive your money or spend your money. And I think for me as a practice, getting rid of products that charged me to use my money was a huge, huge thing. And I'll give you a specific example. Last year I changed banks. I'll just say all the names of the banks because I am not sponsored by anybody. I don't get paid by any of the banks that I'll share or any of the financial products I share. These are just my personal experience. So I was banking with Bank of America, and when I had a job that had direct deposit, it was generally fine. But then when I was freelancing, I started getting charged a fee, and I was like, where did this fee come from? And they're like, oh, unless you have direct deposit or $1,500 minimum, we charge a monthly fee. And I was like, what? I've been with Bank of America for probably over 10 years at that point. And I actually went into the bank and I asked, I was like, I'm a freelancer, can I get this waived? And they were like, oh, we can waive it for 2 months. And I was like, no. So that really led me to start researching other banks. And I know that there are other banks who do this policy. Chase Bank as well, I think, has a minimum if you don't have direct deposit. It's kind of popular with other commercial banks. So I felt as a freelancer that just didn't work for me because I didn't want to have to pay for someone to have my money, and also maintaining a balance of $1,500 in a checking account, just holding it there. I was like, I could be using that money for any number of things, and I didn't want to have to think about if I had less than 1,500 in my checking account. So I just did some bank research and moved banks. So I created a table that is what I use for myself and for clients to help research which bank I should bank with. And I'm going to share my screen and show it to you right now. Oh, Patrick, I'm getting a notice that says I'm unable to share my screen, that I have to be approved by the host.
Let me make you a co-host.
Oh, there we go. Mm-hmm. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. This is the bank research matrix that I created. And let me also, I'm going to copy the link to this because I put it in a public, go back. easiest way to do this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is actually paste this into the chat function. Open the chat back up. There it is. Okay, so that's what I just pasted in the chat is the Word document version of this. You can feel free to download it. If you want to use it, totally fine. I just asked to use it for educational purposes. This is something that I've developed over the last couple of years, so it is part of my practice. There we go. So this document is, and let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so this document is sort of what I sit down and I actually do bank research. If you have a bank and you haven't gone bank shopping recently, or you've just been with the same bank for a long time, or maybe you don't bank with the bank, this is a great way to start. So I actually just go across the top of like the name of the institution, maybe look into both local banks, local credit unions. There's also a number of online banks. And actually write it out, the name of the institution, the type of company. So that would be, is it an online bank where they don't have a physical location that you go to, but you'd use your mobile phone or your mobile app or the web mostly? Is it a credit union or a commercial bank? And then do they have monthly maintenance fees? Do they have minimum balance requirements? Are the ATM networks accessible to you? Do they charge any fees? What is the customer service like? This one is important. One way that I test a bank's customer service is that I call and say, hey, I'm interested in opening an account. I have some questions, and just to see how they respond, because if you ever have an issue with your bank, you want to be able to get someone on the phone. You don't want to have the added stress of, I have a problem and I can't get in touch with anyone. I also have a column for international fees. If you travel outside of the country or you're sending money back and forth or any other types of things you want to know and ask them up front what types of fees they charge. So this is the chart that I use, and I actually did a sample of it using using banks in Erie. Let me just pull that up for you. Okay. So great. So I just pulled up a chart. Patrick gave me a list of some banks that are local to Erie, Pennsylvania, and I started filling out the chart based on those banks. So the banks that are included here are Erie Federal Credit Union, PNC Bank, Marquette Savings Bank, and Erie Bank. And I might draw your attention to, for example, PNC Bank in the column that says monthly account maintenance fees. So they charge $7 a month unless you have a minimum balance of $500 or $500 worth of direct deposit. So that's the type of thing that I would be looking for. Also on the ATM column, so for Erie Federal Credit Union, they charge for withdrawals and inquiries at non-ATMs for their credit union. Whereas Erie Bank, the fourth one down, they use what's called the Money Pass and the Allpoint Network, which is an expanded network of ATMs, so you wouldn't get charged if you use any ATM in that network. So this is what I would actually do, is actually sit down and figure out what banks that you are interested in. Maybe you're also interested in that particular bank's values. Are they investing locally in the community? Do they have a relationship with you culturally or religiously? Just really look at what banks fit you and what they charge to use your money. And ideally, you shouldn't have any minimum balances and no monthly maintenance fees. So I'm going to pause there for a moment and see if anybody has any questions. And it's totally fine with me if you want to unmute and just ask. Oh wait, there's a question. So 1, 2, 3, ABC. Tell me your question. I see the hand raised.
I was not in the Zoom for maybe when it started, so I don't know what's going on. I just saw the link. I was taking naps, so a little bit.
Okay, so what we are talking about is the importance of choosing a bank that doesn't charge you to use your money.
Oh, wonderful.
So the chart that I was just showing was a list of banks that are in Erie and how much they charge for you to store your money there or access your money through an ATM or spend your money. And ideally, in addition to don't get charged to use your money, is store your money somewhere that it grows. So again, if your money is in on a prepaid card, if your money is in other types of accounts, even if you keep your money in Cash App or Venmo, you're not earning interest on that money, but that company is earning interest on your money. And your money is your money.
Right, wonderful.
So
Great news to us.
yes, so that's my big thing, is that your money is your money, and every dollar counts. It doesn't seem maybe like a lot that they charge you $7 a month, but they shouldn't be charging. I mean, they're earning money off of you just having your money in the bank in the first place. So
Right.
yeah. Are there any other questions? Thank you for your question. Any other questions about banking? Yeah.
No, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is kind of a broad question. You might not have an answer, but I'm just curious if you had maybe like crunched any numbers at any point to see like what kind of impact that made over time by switching to that, or like in a certain number of years, if like you noticed a certain amount of savings, because everything that you're saying makes total sense. And like, I'm just curious if there's like if you have like a number in your mind, and I know that's kind of vague, of like how much can be saved from that, or like from your personal experience.
I can definitely say from clients that I see that may or may not use banks, especially if they prefer prepaid cards, that they can be charged anywhere from $30 to $70 a month in transaction fees, because sometimes the card will charge you to spend the money. It will charge you to check the balance. Some banks even charge you to call customer service, $10 to ask a question.
Yeah.
So I've seen that. In terms of me personally, I was definitely saving money by not getting charged that $13 a month maintenance fee, which is at least $120 a year. And you can put $120 to other things.
Yeah.
In terms of savings, I used to not have my savings account and a savings account that earned interest. Now all of my savings accounts are either with Ally Bank, which is an online bank, or Capital One. And that might earn me anywhere from, I don't know, $40 to $100 a year. Again, every dollar counts, and it's better for your money to be sitting somewhere that it grows for the money that you have in savings accounts. And I think both Ally and Capital One have interest. Their checking accounts earn interest as well.
That's good to know. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great.
Absolutely. Hi, Mary.
Hi. Excuse me. What about like transferring fees? So let's say you have PayPal and Venmo, and you have some money in there, transferring over, to like you said, Allied Bank and Capital One, our interest rate. I'm sorry, they earn interest in their savings account. Do they do like, usually they say a small fee?
As far as Ally Bank and Capital One, there's no fees that I've seen. But in terms of transferring the money from a Venmo or a Cash App or a PayPal, Venmo is owned by PayPal, so they're under the same umbrella. They will charge you. So you might have seen like if you get it instant versus if you go to a bank account. So sometimes if you want that money instantly, they charge you 75 cents to $1.50. Whereas if you choose transfer to bank account, it will take maybe 2 to 3 business days, and then you'll get your money, but you won't be charged for the move. So it's kind of like a timing thing. Do you need it right now? Or can you wait the 2 to 3 days? Another thing that I don't have on that chart, but is something to think about, especially for freelancers, is how long a bank takes to process your paycheck. So say you get paper checks, because, you know, I don't know about any of you other freelancers. I still, for certain gigs, they're like, we're sending the check. And you're like, where is the check? Where is the check? So you're waiting for the check. You finally get the check and you deposit the check, and then you wait for days for the check to post to your actual account. You can ask the bank, how long do you take to process deposits? And it can make a difference, 1 business day to 3 business days, right? You get paid on a Friday, you may not actually see that money in your account to spend it till Tuesday. So that is something else that I would also consider. All right, Renegade Performance. Question?
Hi, thanks again. Hey, Danae.
Hey.
Did you have any research on the same thing for IRAs or Roth IRAs, comparing interest rates for those savings accounts? Because that would also interest me as well.
I don't have any research on that. As far as being able to talk, so once we get into IRAs and retirement accounts, we are now falling into the investing area, and I'm not licensed to talk about investing, so I can give you some general overviews, but I can't advise you particularly on investing because that is not something I'm licensed to do. If you're working, and that's another thing, if you're working with any financial coaches, you know, be it me or someone else, you always want to check their credentials and see if they're licensed to be selling, and also if they get paid to sell that product to you. So that can happen with investment accounts where they're going to get compensated for selling that to you, and you want to ask that question outright. So yeah, Andre, sorry, I can't speak too much about the IRAs, but definitely check your credentials of your advisor, and then also see if they are getting paid to sell you a product. Yep. Any other banking questions? Since I shared, oh wait, let me check the chat.
You mentioned checking what your institutions invest in. Where can you go to find information about where your institution is potentially investing your money?
I would say sometimes the when I say invest in, I actually, let me clarify that I mean like where, if they give back to the community in a certain way, they should have that on the website, like our community involvement, what we do in the community, or what areas that they're spending money on. That should be on their website, but I would also just call and ask. Most of the times you can get some of an answer if you call and ask. They may not make that information around where they're investing your money that they're holding available on the website, but you might be able to get that if you call. Oh, also, since I did share like who I bank with, just to give you an example of how that works in terms of my paycheck, and this is both like checks that I get paid like just an individual gig or deposits. I pretty much have a policy of like the money comes in. So this is money raining down from the sky. The money comes in and I try to automatically put 10% directly into my emergency savings. So it's like, hello money, part of 10% goes into savings. If it is a check that that it was a gig that didn't take taxes out, I put 30% of that into a savings account that's just for taxes. You can choose to pay taxes quarterly or at the end of the year, but you definitely don't want to be in a situation where you have no money to pay the taxes because you didn't save it from your gig work. And that can be very easily happen. And then as far as the remaining amount, generally I put part of it into an account that just has my bills in it. So that way, like I know, and we're going to talk about, when you talk about budgeting, you'll see this. I have all of my bills coming out of one account, and then the money in terms of what I'm spending, like I'm going grocery shopping or I'm buying things, that comes out of a different account, so that I'm never worried that if I buy this bill won't go through, or my cell phone bill won't get paid, or something like that. So that I try to keep a lot of peace of mind around my accounts, and we're going to go into budgeting, and you'll see a chart with that in just a second. And I'll also put the link so you can download it and use it yourself. Yeah, I'm curious to, any other banking questions, or if anybody, does anybody have any responses or stories around like either something that happened with your bank that you want to share, or just have you noticed any of these fees being charged, anything like that? Yep, Mary.
Yeah, I had one where they, as a freelancer, you get different checks, and when depositing, they kind of determined the order by which that they deposited, so that if we were getting close, it made it a little tricky, and so all of a sudden there was a late fee, or something of that nature. And this was I guess I can say the name of the bank. It was Citizens Bank, and I guess it was caught, and they were there was litigation over it, because I guess it happened. It was something trackable, but and that was very difficult. When you try to put everything all in as soon as you get it, and try to avoid those deadlines. This was years ago, but that's all of it. Just gets you so much more negative when sometimes those gig checks aren't very big, and then they accumulate those fines, or whatever fees per check.
Yeah.
And it's for every single, so when they deposit the smallest one first, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, all these bills are due, is like, why didn't you process all of them at the same time? Starting from the biggest one that was there, it just created so that they could, it seemed, create these fees that ended up taking a huge chunk out of all of that.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that. You touched on something that's super important, is that banks, especially with checking account, they make most of their money off of insufficient fund fees, NSF fees, things like that. They make a ton of money off of fees. Overdraft fees, they're also called. A ton. They make so much money off of those fees. You can actually turn that feature off on your bank accounts. It's usually, for most bank accounts, it's an automatic feature that they will provide overdraft protection, but you can log in to your bank and like turn it off. And Hannah said that she had a very similar experience to Mary. Yeah, banks have been cited for not only withholding things so that they get charged fees, but also if you're buying multiple purchases in the same day, of actually logging the biggest purchase first, so that puts you negative, and then they get to charge more fees for the rest of the day because they started with a big purchase first. So banks make a ton of money off of fees, and you can feel free to, if you turn the feature off, then you have the chance, you risk the moment of like swiping and then it being like, nah, nope, no money in here. But it might be better to get that than actually get charged $35. It depends on your personal circumstance, but definitely know you can turn that off. And I'm gonna check the chat. Okay. All right, so if there aren't any more questions about banking, I'm gonna shift into budgeting. And if you do have a question that comes up, feel free to put in the chat, and then we will also leave some time at the end for more questions. So budgeting, this is how I paid off my debt, was having a clear budget And I hadn't really budgeted that much before. I kind of like knew roughly how much some things cost, but I hadn't actually like put it down on a sheet of paper and looked at it and to see how much it is. And that having a guide, I think of it as a guide for your money. Like if your money doesn't know where it's going and what it's supposed to be doing, it's very easy for it to get spent on maybe something that's not that important, and then you miss something that is important. But if you take the time to actually make your budget, it's super, super helpful. And the way that I like to start this process is just determining your cost of living. So I think that everyone should just know they should know it like a number off the top of your head, like what is my cost of living? It's super important to know that, especially as a person who does gig work, because that's how you're estimating, did I earn enough this month to pay my monthly bills? Do I know how much my cost of living is? That's the way you're gonna know. And in times like this where you might have a huge cut in your income or things will change, I also, and I'll pull the chart up in a second, I like to divide it into essential and non-essential expenses. Because if something happens, I know that I can cut these non-essential expenses and I know what the cost of my essential expenses are. So let me go to the chart and we'll talk more about it. And actually first I'm gonna paste the link for everyone to be able to have access to it so you can follow along. All right, so right now I'm pasting in the chat. This is a public Google spreadsheet, so feel free to use it, download it. It's not editable, the one that you're looking at, but you can totally make a copy, save it, and use it for your own expenses. This is there are many types of financial documents, but a cost of living document I find just super helpful as a creative and a gig worker because it allows me to make quick changes to my budget. So now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I am on, hopefully you can see my screen and I see some people are in the document, great. So it says Debt-Free Danae Cost of Living Outline. And there's only 4 columns because I like to keep things super simple. I think sometimes budgeting things can get super complex, but I prefer to keep it really simple and work that way. So what I would start with is fixed essential, and by fixed I mean expenses that are typically the same amount every month. So for example, my rent is the same amount every month and it's essential in the sense like I have to have it or I will have no place to live. So I would put that in the first top left category, fixed essential. And I would continue to put all of the expenses there. On the right, I have variable essential. Variable might be like my groceries, things that change from time to time, or like how much I spend on my Metro card because I live in the city. I'm not writing the subway right now, but if I was, and that might be a variable expense. And then the last 2 at the bottom are fixed non-essential. So this might be a Netflix subscription. It's the same amount every month, but it may not be super, super essential. If, the rubber hit the road, like I could live without it. And then variable non-essential, this might be like clothing, eating out, things like that. And at the very bottom, it will add it all up so that you know your total monthly essential expenses, total monthly non-essential expenses, and then your total monthly cost of living. And so I'm going to hit the sample tab at the bottom where it says sheet 1 and then sample. And I filled this out with my personal expenses. So these are my actual expenses pretty much. And you can see in the fixed essential, I have my rent, internet, cell phone, health insurance, renter's insurance. Those are the things that I pretty much need every month that I think are really important for me. My variable essential, I have groceries and miscellaneous because there are just some things that I know that I'll spend a little money on other things. Again, I don't particularly like to get too detailed at this point because I'm kind of trying to get some overall numbers. And then at the bottom, I have fixed non-essential. This is like my Microsoft Office subscription, which sometimes I use, sometimes I don't. Evernote, Dropbox, storing video files, things like that. Apple, I have LinkedIn Premium right now, and Google Suite. These are the same amount every month, but they're not super essential. And then variable non-essential, that's my eating out. And sometimes I take dance classes. Right now, they're all Zoom classes, but I do like to move around when I can. And then if you scroll, and I'm scrolling down to the bottom, so you see that my total essential expenses are about $1,500, $1,550, $55. Non-essential expenses, $238, and then my total monthly cost of living is $1,793, about $1,800. So what do I do with this information? It lets me know that as a gig worker, I need to make at least $1,600 to cover my essential expenses, and then ideally $1,800 to cover everything. And I can take that $1,800 number to figure out how much an emergency fund I might need. And if I'm just starting to save an emergency fund, I can say, well, let me start just saving my first $1,800 because that's 1 month of living expenses. Yeah, so this is, feel free to, like, I would highly suggest, and maybe we can take a moment with your paper that you have to actually just jot down what you think might go for each of these categories for you. So we'll just take a minute to, yeah, just kind of write down for yourself, because I think it is helpful to actually put your own numbers to it, and you can fill it out more after the call.
Danae, may I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So say you have a credit card bill and you're paying off that credit card bill.
Mm-hmm.
Is that under essential or non-essential in the sense that it's not life or death if you pay it off or miss a payment that month, but you'll obviously be incurring costs off of that if you don't pay it?
Do it. That's a good question. I would say generally it probably falls under essential because you have a minimum payment. If you're paying extra on it, that might be considered non-essential, but in reality, if things are really tough, you cannot pay, like, it's not good for your credit, but you could not pay it and eat instead. So it's like, it's technically, I would say, non-essential, but there are major consequences for it in the sense that you will have a hit to your credit score, and you will get charged late fees. But it's, yeah, I would say that it's non-essential actually.
So things like student loans and credit cards, what would probably be preferred is minimum payment amount is listed under a fixed essential,
Mm-hmm.
and then whatever you're paying above that you could put as fixed non-essential, just to be safe.
Yes. Ideally, we always pay all our bills, but I've definitely been an artist long enough to know that sometimes it gets really, really tight, and you have to make decisions. And the reason why I like having this chart and updating it from time to time is that if I am in a crunch, I know that if I cut my non-essential expenses, I can save $240 a month, or if there was a major family emergency or something like that. So it's just helpful to, I think, when you hit a stressful situation, what you don't want to have happen is, okay, what do I cut? Do I keep my Hulu bill? Do I cut this other thing? Like, trying to decide in the moment. Whereas if you have it written down, you can say, well, these things I said were non-essential. Can I look at cutting these and starting from there? So I'm going to unshare this so I can see folks and take any questions about this idea of cost of living.
I'll go
Yeah.
ahead.
Hannah?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I might have just cut somebody off. Okay. So I'm just curious, like, obviously, and I'm sure everybody is so tired of hearing this. We are in unprecedented times in terms of COVID. So like major things that have changed as far as like my expenses during this time have been like, for example, I haven't taken the T once, nor have I needed to. But usually I rely on it almost solely for my transportation. And that is right. So that's something that's like, you know, $90 a month for me. And there are certain things where I've had to pay more, and then they're like groceries, for example, and then reeled my expenses back. So would you recommend like maybe creating a separate sheet just for like this particular circumstance, or adjusting this for now? And then like, how does that apply to kind of, and I understand, like, I'm sure you don't have the answers for how the future will unroll, but how to kind of adapt that as you go, as things continue to change.
Yeah, so, you know, I will not only like duplicate the sheet for different months, because sometimes I might be working on a gig that I know I will make money that month, but then I know I don't have a gig the next month, or I have a big festival where I'm going to earn a lot of money. And then, or there's, you know, there's certain seasons in each of our industries that are like the season when the money is coming in. So I will actually just I'll just duplicate tab at the bottom and do estimates for future months sometimes as well as like make changes for special things like this. So because right now we're situations where like federal student loans are in forbearance. That's not coming back until September 30th. Like there's a lot of things where I'm like, so I know, for example, also my MetroCard is on hold. So that is not in my budget for now, but I might just leave the word written there because I know it might come back later. And that's the big thing with our industry, is that sometimes we really should be planning 2 to 3 months in advance, because it can be super up and down. It could be like I said, it's the season. Like for me as a dancer, it's like December, holiday season, into the New Year's dancing, into the Valentine's dancing, and then it kind of quiets down a bit. So if I know, and this also helps me not overspend when I am making a lot of money, because I'm like, this is my cost of living. So I'm going to try to actually stick to it and then save up the extra money and say, okay, this much equals 1 month, this much equals 2 months. Ideally, we're trying to stretch that out, so that way the money you're earning right now is actually already going to a future time. So yeah, I totally duplicate it. I test out ideas. If somebody says, hey, I want to hire you for a gig and it's out of state, or we want you to come to this festival and it's out of state, I might just duplicate a tab and say, okay, what's the cost of me actually living there to do the thing for that period of time? And is it worth it? Does it work with my budget? Am I going to take on a new expense because I have to now, like, maybe pay for different type of transportation in that city, or eat differently? I won't be cooking because I'm not staying in a place that I have like a stove. I'll be in a hotel, stuff like that, depending on what the per diem situation is. And I see there's a question.
Thank you.
No problem. From Patrick, if your monthly expenses combined are equal to say 1,700 and you're a freelance or gig worker, what would you recommend as target amount for revenue goals so that you're not just surviving but in a position to thrive? Okay, so if, say, I'm going to actually just round that number up to 2,000 for math's sake. So say you know that you need 2,000 a month to make it happen. That's your number. That's your cost of living. You've done the chart. You're like, yep, 2,000 is my cost of living. How much then do you need to earn? I try to earn so that way at least I can account for my taxes and savings. And so I think I mentioned before, like, ideally I try to save 10% of anything I earn. And I literally, like, if someone pays me $10, I put $1 in my savings. I always just make sure to have that habit, and it has saved me so many times. because what you don't want to have to do is borrow when you need money. That's when you have to buy it with your credit card. That's when you need a payday loan, is when you don't have the cash yourself. So always putting that cash aside. And then that 30% for tax. So let me get my little calculator out. And I'm gonna do $2,000. My calculator wants to work today. Oh no, why isn't it working? I'm gonna have to get my phone out. Okay, so, okay, now it's working. So if my cost of living was $2,000 and I wanted to, one, be able to save 10% and have 30% for taxes, to me, that's like 40% of the total income. So what I'm doing is 2,000 divided by 0.4, and that equals $5,000. So yeah, you can actually divide your cost of living by to me, it would be 0.4 because I do always try to save for taxes and I want 10% to go to savings. So that means that I need to be bringing in $5,000 a month, because after taxes and after I've saved, then I have the amount to meet my cost of living. And I will and if somebody, you can double check me on the math, but I'll try a couple of other scenarios. Say my cost of living was $3,000. Yeah. Actually,
would you divide it by 0.4 or would you multiply it by 1.4?
you could do, let's see, if I do 2,000, this is like the thing where it's like you do math, but I use spreadsheets, so I actually don't manually do any math ever. But here we go. So if I do that 2,000 times 1.4, I get 2,800. So, and if I'm living off of essentially 60% of that, that's not enough. So it would have to actually be higher than that. I will do some math at a later point, but.
Danae, if you don't mind, I just got a little confused about how you got that percentage.
Yeah.
And explaining that again. Thank you.
So how I got the percentage of what I'm wanting to take out, or what the total number should be?
Like the 4%, 3%, like.
Okay, so I'm
calculating. Yeah.
So in my mind, say I made $100, $10 is going to savings, and $300 is going to taxes. Because the earning was $100. So that's where I got the 0.3 from for the taxes, and the 0.1 from for the savings. Now you don't have to save, you could just save what you're saving for taxes as an artist, but I like to try to save as well. The math that I was trying to do that I was not able to do was essentially like reverse engineer, if this is my cost of living, what is the number that it needs to be that amount after the deductions, which I would normally do in a spreadsheet, but I'm actually going to try to figure it out. Okay. For 20 more seconds right now. Let me see. And Patrick, it seems like you might have had it, so let me see. Yeah.
So what you would do is you would take if 70% is what you know you're clearing because you're taking 10% and saving it, and then you're taking 30% and putting it towards taxes, you would take your 2,000, which is what your expense was, and you would divide that by 0.7. So your amount you'd have to bring home is $2,857.14, if my math's correct.
Divided by 0.7, $2,800. Yep. Let me see. So yeah, that equals about $2,800. And if I'm doing, yeah, it's 0.7 if you want to do the 30% for sure. So your cost of living divided by 0.7 will give you what you should be earning every month, at least, to be able to pay your taxes, things like that. And I feel like this is one of those moments where I'm like, I'm going to figure out how to do the math by hand forever from now on, from this moment. Any other questions around like saving for income that's coming in, or any like planning or forecasting your budget, things that you've experienced as an artist where it's been made it hard for you to budget? I will say that sometimes what can make it hard to budget is you don't know when the check is coming. Like you did the gig, they're like, we're gonna pay you, check's in the mail, and you're like, but when is the check coming? And then like it can like there's like a magical amount of time that it might actually arrive one day. That can be super stressful, which is why I definitely moved to a place where I was like, I knew at least at minimum I had my 1 month cost of living covered. Like I had saved 1 month cost of living so that I'm not, usually the checks don't take over 30 days, but we've all been there. We're like, it's been 30 days. Where is my money? So yeah, that's why I say you want to work at least a month, or if not 2 months ahead of time, because that will save you a lot of heartache. And one of my big things that I'm always pushing for arts organizations, I'm like, if you're going to pay your artists, pay them the day, like at least the day of the presentation or the event or the festival or whatever you can, because cash flow, not knowing your cash flow can be super stressful, and I try to avoid it by all means.
Danae, I'll ask another question. How do you make the decision between saving and paying down debt?
How do I make this decision between saving and paying down debt? I might be unusual in the sense that I just personally don't like to carry a lot of debt. It's just not something that I've been a super fan of, and I feel really different not having any debt. I feel like it's, opened up some things for me, but I would say you want to pay the minimums at least on your debt so that you can maintain your credit score. Because your credit score and your credit report is essentially a track of your behavior. It's not necessarily just the amount of debt you have, it's have you been making payments on time consistently. On-time payments account for like 35% of your credit score. So like if anything, pay your minimum payment on time. Outside of my minimum payments, I'm thinking about saving for at least 3 months of my cost of living. So I prioritize that over sort of paying off the debt, especially right now when I would say people need to have cash, because there's no telling, like, is unemployment still going to happen? Like, is this going to get extended? Is that going to get extended? This is a time that you want to have cash. So I keep my payments on my debts, right? I would keep my payments on my debts right now to the minimums and hold on to cash and have like at least a month or a couple of months of expenses if you can do it. But other than that, assuming that you're in a different time and you can afford to make payments on your debt and you've already saved for a few months of expenses, then I would pay it down aggressively, as particularly if it's consumer debt like credit card debt. aggressively. They're making money off of interest. It's super, super expensive to carry that debt. And it's, yeah, if you can avoid having it, don't have it. All right, Andre.
As far as debt to student loans, how aggressive, what is the rating or how much does that affect your credit rating that you were just mentioning about making sure you have minimum payments on, let's say, credit card debt? As for student loan debt, what does that factor into your credit rating?
The credit, so I've actually looked at a lot of credit reports with student loan debt this week. So the thing that would be worse, the worst on your credit report is if your student loans are in default. That's going to definitely bring your credit score down. And if you have missed payments, because again, your credit report is a tracking of your behavior. So whether or not you're paying that debt on time every month as scheduled. And then ask the last part of your question. I just want to make sure that I answer it exactly.
Yes, that did. That clarified it.
Yeah. So you can have, like I said, so you can carry, you can carry debt and have an actually pretty decent credit score if you're always paying on time. Where you get a little dicey is if you have missed payments, because they, even one missed payment will stay on your credit report for like 7 years generally. So sometimes if I have a missed payment, I will call and say, I, made a mistake and didn't pay that on time. It's my first time that I missed a payment. Can you waive this late payment and not report it? And they'll usually be like, oh yeah, as a courtesy, we will do this. That's how much I'm like gung-ho about like not having missed payments.
So pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
So you are able to call in to let's say your credit card or even your student loans and negotiate taking off any missed payments.
Yes, you can negotiate taking off late payments. Generally, they do it for the first 1 or 2 times, but that is negotiable. Yes. And if for any reason there was a misreporting, like if you paid it on time and it was marked as a missed payment, you can call about that as well. And I'm going to the chat because I see there's some questions. Somebody had to hop off. Hannah, do sole proprietors have only the option of paying taxes annually, or can they pay taxes quarterly? Would paying taxes quarterly help someone better project and prepare for future tax obligations? And do you pay quarterly and has it helped you? And then it looks like someone answered that question. So there we go. Let's see. Oh, wait, let's go back down. So personally, do I pay taxes quarterly? It depends. For me personally, sometimes I have a mixture of income that's both gig work and like direct deposit work where they're taking taxes out of it. And what I will do is essentially have more taxes taken out of the direct deposit job. So it's essentially kind of like starting to cover for the gig work taxes. So I won't pay quarterly taxes and I'll just pay at the end of the year and hold that money. But I can see it both ways. If you're the type of person where, it's going to be super stressful at the end of the year to pay taxes, and you maybe consider paying quarterly taxes. But yeah, you can definitely talk to your accountant about that and find the strategy that works best for your tax situation and how you just like to manage your money. And I would say as artists, having a good accountant can be very helpful, especially if you tour outside of the state or outside of the country. There's so many every state can have different laws, and to me, it can feel overwhelming to make sure that I file properly in each state. And so I have an accountant that definitely does that for me. Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to put my email in the chat. Apps that I recommend for tracking spending. I've used a lot of different apps over the time. I was like a super big Mint person for a while. There are a lot of different apps. I don't have any strong recommendations specifically. Again, I prefer things that don't cost money because it's your money, so I try to keep it. I know people who have success with You Need a Budget. I know people who have success with Mint, which is free. Trying to think of other apps that I know that clients like. Nothing is coming off the top of my mind. That spreadsheet that I showed you, I'm like, sometimes like I'm just like a very simple spreadsheet, especially because I'm doing so many projections. Like I'm trying to guess like what my income's going to be 3 months from now when it's busy season. So yeah. Do you personally prefer to get a tax refund, or is it better to zero out, don't owe, and why? So the reason you get a tax refund is because essentially you overpaid for your taxes and you're getting a refund for it. So you're kind of letting the government hold that money for the year until your refund comes. I'm totally cool with not getting a refund, but I also have a very, set budgeting plan where I know what I'm saving. I've prioritized saving. I've prioritized my investments. So I'm okay with it. But for some folks, like your tax refund is a huge influx of income. So again, that's a personal opinion. Talk to your accountant, but that's how it showed up for me is I actually don't mind if I don't get a refund because I know that I'm using that money wisely through the year. Okay, so I put my email in the chat and I'll hang around for maybe 5 or so minutes if anybody wants to ask a question, but otherwise, remember, don't pay to use your money. Have a bank that is right for you. Don't pay any fees. And also know your cost of living as a gig worker. It will be so helpful to always have that number in your mind. So thank you all. And I'll hang out for anybody who wants to hang out. Anybody who's jumping off, have a great rest of your evening.
Janae, you had mentioned earlier about having an account for your bills and then having a separate. Now, do you have a completely different account or is it linked to like a primary account? How do you handle that and making it so that it's not confusing?
It is actually a completely separate account. So the way it works for my expenses, like I have a Capital One checking account and I have an Ally checking account. And the Ally checking account is my bills account. So I added up that like fixed category, the fixed bills. And I know that that amount of money needs to be in that account all the time. And I put portions of my paycheck directly into that account each month. And then my Capital One is my spending, and that's groceries, all my variable expenses, groceries, eating out, things like that. So yeah, they're totally separate. They're totally separate cards. So I know what color card I'm reaching for. It's like, am I out of my house and I'm spending money? It's the blue card. I don't like, and the purple card is like, for some reason, if I'm an emergency and like, I don't know if like that card wasn't working, then I know I have the other account, but I generally keep them separate, and it has prevented me from having any late payments on my bills probably for the last 2 years, 3 years, if not more. So yeah.
What about like, it just kind of escaped. Your savings. So is that linked through either of those, or is that now a third account?
I do have a savings account with Ally as well. Ally has some interesting features, like they have like, you can make your savings account into different buckets for different categories. I'm like into that, so like I like to get into it. So it may or may not be a feature that you're into, but like I do have both a savings account with Capital One and Ally. And again, because their accounts don't have any fees, I don't feel as like nervous about opening the account because it doesn't have to have anything in it. Because there's no minimum. So yeah, I do have savings accounts, and one is for like large miscellaneous expenses, and that's on that spending side. And then the other one is for like my emergency savings. So that's where I'm really building up money every month towards my cost of living.
Danae, I think I might know what your answer to this could be, but with things like the fixed non-essentials and things of that nature, what are your thoughts on playing the point games with credit cards if you know that your intent is to pay that balance off every month because you're looking at something like only what you've calculated in your fixed non-essentials?
Mm-hmm. I have clients that ask me that a lot, and I go back and I actually look at their payment history. If they've ever carried a balance, I'm like, nope, maybe you're not ready for that yet. Because it's so easy to charge something to a credit card and it stay on the credit card, even if you intended to pay it off. So I would say I would actually look at the history of their payments and say, do they consistently pay their credit card off every month? Are they comfortably, is their budget set up in a way where their money knows where it's going and what it's for? If that all checks out, all of it checks out, then I'm like, yes, you can, explore using your credit cards for points and things like that. But I know from just working in the industry and with credit cards, they make a lot of money off of people spending money to get money. Like spending money, I'm going to get these points. And then they end up carrying balances and paying, 20% interest on that. So it's a slippery slope, but I would say if you're super solid with your budget, then go for it. If you're still like get into that solid place, maybe wait to see about that, and never ever feel pressure to, like, if you're feeling pressure, like you open up a credit card and it's like you must spend $2,000 in the first 3 months and you're just like going around swiping. That's how people get caught up. I see that a lot. So we all have the best intentions of just paying it off, and then you let it sit on the card, then that 0% interest introductory fee goes away, then you get charged a lot of interest at the end. So yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Well, there is a giveaway. I forgot to mention that before I said goodbye to everyone. But if you registered for this, I'm going to just randomly choose someone, and they will get a free budgeting session, and I will actually sit and help them map out their entire budget and review their banking. So that is a bonus. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for joining.
Well, if that's it, thank you so much for your time and your expertise today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this Thursday evening to talk about banking and budgeting.
Yes. So send your money towards your visions. Keep making your art. We are important. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend.
Have a good evening.
Bye. Patrick, I'll stay on for a moment if you want to chat.
Okay.